morning, all you cosmic people. I'm Dr. Kimberly Rackley, and this is the Mystic View Show. Before we get started, I would like to send out a lot of love and prayers to the director of Nightside Paranormal. His mother passed away unexpectedly last night, and it was kind of a shock for his family. And I just want him to know that we all love him and adore him, and our prayers are with him. And it was kind of sad because today's a good day for me with Nightside Paranormal. It's my birthday with Nightside Paranormal. 2 years being lead psychic medium and assistant director, and we call it Blight Day. So today is my Blight Day with Nightside Paranormal. So I celebrated by buying myself new earrings, like most ladies do. But all right. So, Brian, we love you. We're with you. We're thinking about you. And if you need us, you know where to find us. Tonight, my guest is Ken Gerhard. He's a cryptozoologist, author, researcher, speaker. He's just about everything you can imagine. He's called the Monster Hunter, which my son kind of likes. He can't wait to maybe meet Ken in person one day. You may know Ken from... let's see, his feature appearances on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, I think A&E, Destination America, True TV. He's everywhere. And there's a good reason for that, because he's good at what he does. And he has the presence to present it. His newest book is Encounters with Flying Humanoids. So, hi, Ken. Welcome, the Monster Hunter. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me on, Kimberly. It's awesome to be here.
It is a real pleasure to have you on. I wanted you on my other show before, but we could never connect, and so I'm really happy today that we connected.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we were able to hook this up, and I appreciate you working with me. My schedule's been a little crazy over the past month or so.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, crazy in a good way, but glad we were able to make it happen.
So how's your book going? Are you doing a lot of book signings and that kind of thing?
I am. I just got back from doing a lecture in Los Angeles last night, and my first West Coast lecture out there. And, I've been doing a lot of interviews, and there's a lot of work that goes into getting the word out on a book. But I've been real happy so far. I've been getting some great feedback, and... So, yeah, things are going well, I think.
Good. I still have to get the book. I just now got David Weatherly's new book, and he's a friend. Mm-hmm. But I haven't even read it yet, but I got it. So give me time. I'll get yours, too.
Oh, no worries. No worries. It's out and available online in gobs of places. And the cool thing is that you can actually run down to your Barnes & Noble and find it there in the metaphysical section. So...
Oh, nice. Well,
pretty accessible at every Barnes & Noble location.
Nice. Well, I'm going tomorrow. So I'm actually driving down to Orlando to meet Jim Mallard. You know who that is. Everybody knows Jim. Yeah, yep. He's down here in Florida, so we're going to meet up and see what trouble we can get into together.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah, I'll have to stop by and get your book while I'm in shopping town. I don't shop very much or go to town. So in your book, I was looking over some of the things that it contained, and the Mothman, and one that I have never heard of myself, which is the Owlman. So I would like to know a little bit about that, because I've never heard of the Owlman. I mean, everyone's heard of the Mothman and gargoyles, which I'm fascinated with. But the Owlman, I don't know this story or this legend.
Well, Owlman is awesome. He's probably one of my favorite mysterious creatures. Very, very creepy and weird, and sort of England's version of Mothman in some ways, but definitely a handful of sightings of the Owlman that date back to 1976. Starting in Easter of 1976, two young girls were playing out in the woods next to an old creepy church known as Mount Ann Church in Cornwall, England, right there on the coast. And they were on holiday, and they were playing, and they saw what they described as a gray Birdman hovering above the church, and they ran screaming back to their parents in hysterics. And that kind of started it off. And then later a couple months later in July, there were two other young ladies that were camping, ages 11 and 14, that were camping out there in the woods. And they saw the Owl Man, and the descriptions were, again, very similar. And the Owl Man is described as being about 5 feet tall and kind of a grayish color. Unlike the Mothman, he seems to be covered in some kind of fur-like or feather-like covering. Like the Mothman, giant red glowing eyes, pointy ears. Instead of a beak, it has this black grimacing scowl on its face, and for feet it has black pincers, kind of like crab claws.
Wow.
And so the descriptions have all been pretty consistent. And interestingly enough, Kimberly, virtually all of the eyewitnesses of Mothman have been adolescent girls between the ages of 9 and 16. They're like about nine different witnesses were young ladies, and one young gentleman. 10 witnesses were young ladies, and one young gentleman named with the pseudonym Gavin saw it in the 1980s. But all the sightings have been around this old church in the woods, in the graveyard, and very similar. And people are obviously very freaked out by it. The one girl described it as saying that at first she thought, it was a real. There's no way it was a person in a costume. She knew it was a real animal, but something that she had never seen before, and unlike anything on Earth. And when it took off into the air, she knew for a fact that it was a real animal and not a person in a costume. But she said it also had kind of a very unreal or surreal aspect to it as well. So pretty creepy and weird stuff. And you might be interested to know that this old church, Mount Ann Church, is in a very spooky place there in England, where there have been sightings of sea serpents right on the coast and all kinds of other UFOs. And this church is supposedly built on an ancient earthwork. So
really?
Yeah, the whole thing is a really fascinating story. And a colleague of mine, John Downs in England, actually has written a definitive book on the Owl Man. And he's done a lot of research in the Owl Man. And actually he feels that he had some, through the course of researching and writing the book in the late 1990s, he felt that he experienced some psychic backlash. His pets started dying mysteriously, and his car and his computer died, and his wife left him, and all these horrible things happened to him. And he feels that all of that was associated with his involvement with the Owl Man.
I totally think it could be. I mean, with most things paranormal, if you mess with it too long or find out something you're not supposed to, it will find ways to keep you from wanting to know more. I mean, I think.
Well, certainly. And we may be starting this out early in the conversation. And, we should qualify this by saying, Kimberly, I have the greatest respect for you and others in the field and have different gifts and talents and insights and perceptions. But I'm more of a traditional cryptozoologist. I don't really get into this supernatural stuff that often. But I did with this Flying Humanoid book, and that is one of the recurring themes with these flying humanoids, including Mothman, Owlman, and others, is that they are essentially very negative energy, that they have a very negative aura, that their presence or appearance is a premonition of some fatal or horrific event or death, and that people that get into this stuff are affected in a negative way. So it's pretty scary stuff.
It is scary stuff. Now, I don't remember the show, but it was like just in turning the channel. There was a show about Mothman on at some point. I think it was last year. And some spiritual retreat witnessed him or something, and they all think he's an angel of warning or something like that. Have you heard that theory before? Oh yeah. Well, that theory stemmed from there was a horrible tragic bridge collapse that happened a year after the Mothman first appeared, and 46 people drowned there in the Ohio River when the Silver Bridge collapsed right in Point Pleasant. And to this day, the people in and around Point Pleasant that I've spoken to feel that the Mothman's appearance was a premonition of that bridge disaster. Another gentleman that I have interviewed here in San Antonio who had sighted it or encountered a flying humanoid in the late 1990s said that it was exactly 3 days before a horrible flood in October of 1998 where 30-some people drowned. And then there are other accounts. The Jersey Devil is also associated with, so
it seems to be a recurring theme, and a lot of this goes back, in antiquity too, because if you look at like the ancient Assyrians worshipped this god known as Pazuzu, which was essentially a humanoid type of creature.
I know about Pazuzu.
Yeah, well, okay, Pazuzu. So Pazuzu was also considered to be the bringer of destruction and famine and destitute and horrible inclement weather and things. So,
so it could all be related.
Well, that's certainly one of
Pazuzu could be related.
It's one of the theories. Certainly, there are some connections. It seems.
So, with the Owlman and Mothman and the young women, do you have a theory about that? I mean, why do you think that that's so?
Well, I'm sure you guys in the paranormal encounter this as well, but young people seem to be more open, and oftentimes will seem to experience or see things that older people, adults, are not able to see. And there are many theories about this, but probably the most logical one is that when you're young, you're kind of an open book and you're open to the world, and you haven't developed any biases or what I call filters. As we get older, we put up walls and filters, and we see and experience what we choose. In some ways, perhaps the human mind will reject certain things that we don't fit into our paradigm of existence. But young people don't have that problem. They're learning, they're open to the world, they're new, and they're seeing the world with new eyes. So, as far as the fact that it was mostly females, females certainly seem to have, intuitions that men perhaps don't have, in terms of, and this could be very much related to the fact that they are more in tune with their emotional state, which is probably somehow connected to their, belief systems and different things like that. So I don't know. You could probably school me on this, but that's what I think. And it's also the case with Mothman. Many of the witnesses of Mothman were young women as well, teenage women that were chased by this thing. So, or perhaps these entities are somehow attracted to young females for some reason.
That was going to be my next question. Do you think it's an attraction thing?
Quite possibly. The other theory that I kind of put forward in the book is that these beings seem to be emotional vampires. They seem to take great pleasure in chasing people and terrorizing people. And certainly, if that's the case, and they're feeding off of emotional energy, then it seems like a young, terrified female, a teenage girl would perhaps have the strongest emotions of fear, and perhaps give them, therefore, the most fuel.
I agree. And plus, teenage women are, they're just becoming women. They're filled with ideas of passion and excitement and that kind of thing as well. So it might put off a signal or a vibration.
Absolutely. So many fascinating possibilities.
I know. I love thinking about them all. That's why I'm a researcher, because one idea leads to another, and I just can't stop myself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you have, and I would never have thought that gargoyles would be considered, cryptic or, mysterious, yes, and mythical, yes, but I never would have thought that they would be, in the humanoid area. I think they're fascinating, obviously, because I like gothic things and that kind of thing. But I've got tons of gargoyles around my apartment. I've always loved gargoyles, and one of the reasons I wanted to include them in the book was, I wanted to broaden the scope of the book a little bit, because although there are a lot of cases of traditional flying humanoids in certain forms, there do seem to be a lot of variations in descriptions. But moreover, there seem to be some strong similarities between these cases of these gargoyle-type creatures and the flying humanoids like Mothman. For example, the Jersey Devil, which I mentioned a moment ago. There's a thing in England that's been cited called the Brentford Griffin, which is kind of a gargoyle-type creature. Predominantly these creatures, whatever they are, they don't appear to be flesh and blood. They certainly don't resemble anything that has evolved naturally on our planet. So therefore, they are manifestations, or some people refer to them as interdimensional
I'm okay with that. You know, we can't really say where they're from,
Mm-hmm.
but they certainly don't behave or look like anything on this planet. And the way that they interact with people, the observers, is very similar too. Again, you know, chasing people, terrifying people. You know, they seem to be in many cases associated or linked to very spooky locations where there have been other unexplained events like UFO sightings and things like that, poltergeist activity and so forth.
Interesting. Now, okay, you mentioned like the griffin, and aren't there like specific types of like griffin wings that are associated with some demons? Like, aren't some demons associated with having like griffin-like wings?
Well, the griffin is kind of a heraldic image from Europe, as you may well know, and it's you know, essentially the traditional interpretation of a griffin is a animal that has the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. Although there are some slight variations, there is a wingless version, for example. Quick sidebar here. It has been theorized that the griffin may have actually stemmed from discoveries of fossils in Asia, specifically dinosaurs like Triceratops, which have basically a beak and have a body that's very strong and muscular. So, I mean, that's kind of a cool theory if you think about it. If they had dug up these Triceratops fossils and they found this animal that has this giant muscular body and a long tail, but a head that has kind of a beak and looks kind of like an eagle. So that's kind of an interesting sidebar, I think. But, you know, gargoyles take many forms, don't they? I mean, if you look at the gargoyles of Europe, you find many different examples. So I think a gargoyle in the big picture, or at least in my mind, is something that has a chimeric aspect. That is, it combines different elements or characteristics from all kinds of animals kind of mixed together.
Yeah, I think they're fascinating. Well, the legends, you know, I guess their origins, weren't they like first, I guess, discovered or became popular in France? Isn't that where they first?
I believe so, and I believe the name gargoyle is actually derived from a French word. And if you've ever seen Notre Dame Cathedral, I was there a few years ago. It's covered with hundreds of amazing gargoyles, so that's quite possible. Now, gargoyles seem to be protectors. They are placed on cathedrals and you know, royal palaces and places where they are, you know, kind of lined up like sentries. And I guess the prevalent theory is that their main design is to ward off evil spirits and things like that.
Do you think that they have a connection to dragons?
Quite possibly, yes. Dragons are also, you know, similarly, were often put on places that were, you know, sacred and viewed as, I guess, sort of protectors in some ways. But you know, there's so many different folklores and mythologies around the world with fabulous creatures, and they, you know, in many aspects they take on similar forms or similar attributes, but in other cases they're quite different. So, but the meanings and the symbolisms behind them, you know, seem to be consistent. So, you know, typically they are viewed as ambiguous in terms of they are protectors and defenders. And, you know, revenge seekers, but on the other hand, they're often, you know, very frightening to us, and, you know, they can also be antagonists as well as protagonists.
Right. So how many creatures or entities do you cover in the book?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I've ever done a running count, Kimberly, but I would say you know, easily 24 or more, because there's so many different types. And I you know, I have an appendix in the book where I talk about a lot of the historical and mythological creatures and different cultures around the world. And then you know, when I'm doing the modern reports, I have an entire chapter that's pretty much dedicated to the Mexican version, which seems to be kind of more of like what I refer to as an aeronaut, you know, kind of like humanoids that are just kind of floating around in the air that don't have wings, but they have some type of apparatus or uniform on, almost like some kind of weird astronaut from another planet or something.
That's
and then, of course,
interesting.
Mothman gets a whole chapter because it's a very complex case with many different aspects and a lot of information. Gargoyles get a chapter, and the gargoyle chapter includes a lot of different forms. The Birdmen, also I do a chapter about UFO cases too, because there seem to be some cases where there are similarities with UFO occupants and some of these flying humanoids as well. They're essentially they're impervious to gravity. That's the main thing.
Right. Yeah.
They just kind of fly around in the air.
Yeah. So, do you have a favorite?
Well, maybe Owlman is my favorite. I've always thought it was kind of a really creepy and cool story. Mothman is near and dear to my heart because when I was a young boy growing up, my mother used to, really enthrall me with stories about the Mothman. She really loved that, and it kind of piqued my interest in the unexplained. It was one of the things that piqued my interest in the unexplained. But, they're all near and dear to my heart, I guess. Hard to choose.
They have to be if you love researching them. Did your mom get you interested in this area?
She didn't necessarily. Well, she was a huge influence on me. But initially, what happened was, like most young boys who are 8 or 9 years old, I was watching TV and I caught a show about Bigfoot. It was actually a news broadcast where they were talking about these Bigfoot casts that were being found or tracks that were being found, and that's what really got my interest in cryptozoology, I guess, and unexplained creatures. But my mother embraced that, and she used to take me to the library to look for books, and she used to tell me stories about Mothman and the Yeti. And then, moreover, she was an enabler because we would travel all over the world. She was a travel agent. She'd take me on these amazing vacations, including like Loch Ness in Scotland and Australia and Africa.
Nice.
All these places where there were legendary creatures that I could kind of investigate or try to investigate as much as I could at that age.
So Bigfoot, you're really involved with a lot of Bigfoot investigations. I mean, if there's an investigation, you seem to be wanted. You're pretty popular with the Bigfoot.
I've done a lot of Bigfoot investigations all over North America and Central America, and I feel very fortunate to have relationships with most of the top researchers around the country. But I would say in the big picture of cryptozoology, I'm kind of more specialized in some of the flying cryptids and maybe some other diverse things that I've investigated, like black panthers and werewolves and
werewolves.
So
That's
forth.
Interesting.
But as far as the Bigfoot stuff goes, I mean, I'm certainly involved and active in that, but there are just so many outstanding researchers in the Bigfoot field that are probably more active than I am in terms of pure Bigfoot research. I mean, guys that go out there and put a lot more field work in. I used to, when I started out, I was doing a lot of field work, but for Bigfoot, but not so much these days. I still do expeditions here and there with different researchers, but there are a lot of excellent Bigfoot researchers out there right now.
Oh, I agree. So what about werewolves? Are there really werewolves?
Well, I can't tell you that I've ever seen one. There's certainly, we know there are werewolves in different legends from Europe and other places around the world. My greatest involvement with the werewolf mythos is initially in 2001, 2002, when I was really getting into cryptozoology field research again. I traveled up to Wisconsin and investigated something called the Beast of Bray Road, which has been written extensively about by a woman named Linda Godfrey, who's a friend and colleague of mine, and she's really the acknowledged expert on modern werewolf reports, and there seem to be a lot of them that stem from the Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, but other states as well. But in 2009, I traveled to France and did a TV show for the History Channel called The Real Wolf Man. And in that particular case, we were investigating something called the Beast of Gévaudan, which was labeled a werewolf. And back in the 1760s, starting in 1765, 1766, it was credited with attacking and killing many people in the south of France. And the descriptions of the Beast of Gévaudan were a wolf-like animal that was enormous, about the size of a small calf, long bushy tail, kind of a reddish fur with a stripe down its back, and sharp claws and teeth, and just immensely ferocious and aggressive towards humans.
Wow.
And powerful, because it would often decapitate people or sever their limbs and so forth. It became a pretty big deal in France, to the extent that King Louis XV actually dispatched battalions of soldiers down to the area to try to kill this thing, because it was creating havoc in his country at the time. And ultimately, a gentleman named Jean Chastel did shoot something that was believed to be the Beast of Gévaudan. And there's many theories still about what exactly it was, but pretty fascinating case, and a pretty iconic case in terms of European lore and French history.
Definitely. That's very interesting. So, what do you consider vampires? I just have to ask, because everyone seems so fascinated with vampires, and, what would you consider them? Just...
honestly, it's a little bit probably out of my area of expertise, to be honest with you, Kimberly. Even though I'm a so-called monster hunter, I still try to follow the methodologies of zoology and science. So I'm typically looking for flesh and blood explanations for things. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, because obviously people have very fanciful imaginations, and I frequently get asked, at the lecture last night, people were asking me about fairies and mermaids and trolls and all kinds of mythological creatures, but none of those are really viable from a scientific perspective. Not to say that flying humanoids are really any different, because they are probably the same thing, but if vampires exist, then obviously they are definitely some type of supernatural or paranormal phenomenon, something perhaps akin to or similar to flying humanoids in some ways, because they are greatly feared and greatly revered in different cultures around the world.
Yeah, because people do call them, some people call them monsters, and they do fly, so that's why I was asking. Well,
that's interesting, but I didn't really cover them in the book per se, but I know vampires are hot, perhaps not as hot as zombies right now, but I have yet to investigate any zombie or vampire cases.
Do you have plans to?
Well, if I'm invited. There was a TV producer a couple of years ago that was trying to, had asked me and some other researchers to do a show called Vampire Hunters, which I thought was going to be an awesome opportunity to travel all over the world and look at famous vampire cases and legends, but the whole thing kind of fell through. So if there are any TV producers out there, I would definitely be on board with doing a Vampire Hunters TV show.
Definitely. You got the look for that, too. You and that hat. You have to tell me about your hat. That hat seems to go with you everywhere. So what's up with the hat? It's a cool hat.
Well, thank you. It's kind of a trademark thing. Giorgio from Ancient Aliens has hair that sticks up in the air. I have a hat. Yeah. Other people have other things that they're, basically the story behind the hat is I used to, before I was doing the cryptozoology hardcore, I was in a band, and it was kind of a really heavy, dark industrial band, kind of like Rob Zombie type stuff, and we were traveling around the country, and we were doing a show in Toronto, and I saw the hat in a leather store, and I had them put the skull on the front, because I found the skull emblem in the store too, and I said, can you put this skull on that hat? And once I put it on my head, we just fell in love with each other, and we've been through a lot together ever since. And then I started, I started going to a lot of events and things, and I thought that the hat would be a good way for people to remember me, because you meet so many people sometimes at different events and places.
You do.
And it's hard sometimes to keep track. So, anyways, but that's it. And I'm a Texan, so
Yay, Texans! My husband's a Texan, but you already
go
know
Texas,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, Texas boys are pretty good. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the hat works because everyone recognizes you by your hat, it seems.
Well, it's probably a double-edged sword, because I had a gentleman, after my lecture last night, a gentleman came up to me and he said he wasn't really familiar with my work, and he said, when I came in and I saw you with the hat on, I thought that you were just going to be full of crap and that you were going to be up there just, grandstanding is how he put it, but he was actually pretty complimentary. He said, yeah, you have done research, so yeah, I think the hat obviously portrays a strong message about who I am and what I'm about. But on the other hand, people that are, and early on, when I first got into the cryptozoology game seriously, and I was getting a lot of criticism about the hat, like, oh my, how is anyone going to ever take cryptozoology seriously when we have guys like this running around? So
I totally understand. I have a huge crystal necklace, and everyone expects a medium to wear, crystals and everything. And the crystal, I believe it helps me with my energy, so I wear it. So I understand the hat thing. But being put in a place where, she's wearing crystals, she's one of those silly ones. So, yeah, I understand the hat thing.
Well, there's nothing wrong with expressing who you are through your attire. And, that's why people get tattoos and wear certain types of clothes. And, we're living, it's almost interesting how the culture regresses. And it's almost like we're living again in kind of this tribal culture now, where people feel like, that they have to, look a certain way to act a certain way or to I don't know. It's a sociological thing, but
it is.
You got to have a little bit of flair. I think that's what it boils down to, particularly in our field. You got to have some flair. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. No, there's not. And your hat is getting a lot of compliments in the chat room, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, what are you researching now, or are you taking a break? Oh my goodness. Sorry. There's a dog barking. I do apologize.
No, I couldn't hear it.
There's a creature.
Wow. I'm never taking a break, so work. I've started my new book, and I want to try to pump one out a little bit faster than the last three. They've all taken me a couple of years, but this one I'm trying to get out fairly soon. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's not going to be about one subject per se. It's going to be more of like a compendium or collection of different things that I've investigated and different accounts that have never been published, that have been passed along to me, and so forth. So I think there'll be a little something for everybody in it.
Oh, that'll be nice. I want to know more about, things like the Loch Ness Monster, and there's just so much that people want to know about that it's hard to sometimes keep up. I mean, there's just so much to learn and to understand, and I keep finding myself wanting to jump from creature to creature, but if I do that, I'm missing, all the details. But it's like, oh, that creature is really cool, or that creature is really scary. Let me find out about him, but then I forget about finding out more about, the last creature that I was fascinated with. If they were all in one book, that would be amazing. Well,
that's just the point, because most people are familiar with Bigfoot by now, and Bigfoot and Sasquatch has gotten a lot, and similar creatures like the Yeti have gotten a lot of publicity through TV shows and books and so forth. But the field of cryptozoology is so vast. You have things like the Loch Ness Monster and other similar lake monsters around the world, Champ and Ogopogo and sea serpents. You could literally have a discussion that lasted hours and hours and hours about all of that evidence. And then there are the flying cryptids, not necessarily the flying humanoids, but like the thunderbirds that I've investigated. That's a pretty fascinating topic. Black panthers, something that's very prevalent, and many reports all over North America and Europe. And a number of other lesser-known types of cryptids that people don't really hear about as much. And then, there is even some things like in Africa, they have something known as the Mokele Mbembe, which has been described as basically a surviving dinosaur living deep in the Congo, and a lot of people are really fascinated with that. Oh, yeah.
That's fascinating.
Fascinating subject. So,
are you going to go there?
Oh, I wish, but that's almost a death wish, that trip. It's several of my heroes have been out there: Dr. Roy Mackle and Richard Greenwell, John Kirk, and Bill Gibbons. And I mean, literally, when you go out to some of these areas in Africa and the Congo to investigate, you're really putting your life on the line. They've gotten deathly ill with malaria. It's a lawless land where you've got basically guerrillas and headhunters, or not headhunters, but very, very, very vicious people running around in these remote areas. So you're really taking your life in your own hands. But not to say that I wouldn't do it if I had the opportunity. I guess probably the main issue is just the financial aspect, because you're talking about a pretty penny to travel over to Africa into the deep Congo. But I would love to go.
I think money's an issue with a lot of us researchers.
Well, yeah, but particularly traveling halfway around the world. An airplane ticket, I've been looking at airplane tickets to Africa are like $3,000. So, I mean, it's...
Wow.
That's just to get, to the parts of Africa I want to go. That's just round trip. And then how do you get up into the remote Congo? Well, you've got to rent canoes and guides and all kinds of things. Take all your medicines.
And, supplies and... definitely.
So you got to pay off government officials because the governments are corrupt. These are true stories. This has really happened.
I can see you doing that.
Yeah. So no, I live for adventures. So, but point being, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. There are many things in the field of cryptozoology that I think people would find fascinating that just don't get a lot of publicity, and those are the things I'm writing about right now.
Excellent. So, if you had to rate, I have to ask this too, because if you had to rate different creatures in cryptozoology, what do you think the most popular ones would be?
Oh, wow. Well, obviously, again, Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, and if you want to put a global label on that, then you'd look at things like the Yeti, the abominable snowman from the Himalayas. China has a version known as the Yeren, the Orang Pendek from Sumatra, the Yowie from Australia, the Mapinguai from Brazil. So these are basically all very similar. They're man-like creatures, hominids, very man-like, walking upright, covered in hair, almost like primitive subhuman type creatures. Those are obviously number one. Number two, I would say, is the chupacabra. People always want to ask me about that, and I think the chupacabra has gotten a lot of good publicity over the years, and it's probably the closest thing you're going to find to a modern vampire, so people really like that. Third would maybe be the Loch Ness Monster and some of those other lake monsters I mentioned, and then you have things like the Jersey Devil and again, Mokele and Mbembe, very popular for those in the field. So yeah, those are probably maybe the top five.
Excellent. And I'm always seeing, like, every once in a while on social media, there'll be this strange picture of something discovered. And I tell my son, I'm like, don't believe it until Ken says it's something. Because they're just so, out there that you don't want to go, oh my God, it's another new creature. I mean, I've seen some weird pictures on like Facebook and like there's all these different news things on the internet, weird news and things like that.
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of them are probably Photoshop, but some of them are just, it's all about interpretation. Like I've seen photos floating around on the internet, kind of viral photos over the past year that are known animals that people don't see very often, and just, in the context that they're shown, they look pretty remarkable and monstrous, but they are known species. So
Definitely.
people just aren't always familiar with everything that's out there because we tend to live in very urban or suburban areas, and we aren't exposed to a lot of different types of animals that we rarely see.
Exactly. Do you have any TV projects coming up?
Not that I'm at liberty to talk about. Sorry, it's not personal, but literally when you start working on a TV show, the first thing they have you do is sign something called a non-disclosure agreement, which says that you can't tell anyone what you're doing. So
exactly.
But I will say that I think I can say that I have filmed 2 new TV shows so far this year, and they will be on later this year. So I do have some things coming on later this year on different channels.
Nice. Well, you've been on a lot of channels already. Wow. I was reading your list, and I mean, I've seen you on several, but I didn't know that you had been on that many. I was like, wow. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, right? Why?
Well,
I don't get it either, but okay. Well, there have been a couple of duds there, Kimberly. Last year I did an episode of Shipping Wars on A&E, and I wasn't too pleased with the way that turned out. And I did another show called Monster Project that was on Nat Geo Wild, and I thought that one kind of sucked too. I mean, they really misled us as far as what it was supposed to be. I thought it was going to be an investigation show, and it was kind of a comedy spoof type thing. So
yeah, we didn't. I watched it just because. I mean, you posted that you were, going to be on, and I told my whole family, you have to watch the show, and we were like, they shouldn't do it that way. I mean, we were like really upset that the show turned out to be that way instead of more serious. And
yeah, most people were, but so sometimes that happens when you film, obviously not very, very often. I mean, most of the TV shows I've done, I think they've done a really good job with portraying how we do serious research and kind of taking a serious look at it. But, occasionally it does happen where you kind of fall into that trap. And, once you've filmed it, they can edit it however they want. So you don't have any control or rights at that point. So you're just kind of putting everything in their hands. So
right. And with before you mentioned, the alien connection with some creatures because it just seems to flow that way. Do you have any, theories about certain creatures with an alien connection? I know that you work with Nick Redfern as well. You guys work on projects together, and I consider him Mr. Alien Guy. But, I mean, do you have theories about the alien connection in some creatures?
Well, it's just interesting that when, Mothman was, around the time Mothman was so prevalent and some of these other flying humanoid cryptids, that there were a lot of UFO sightings, strange lights in the sky and stuff. But I don't know if I don't think I have enough evidence to draw that conclusion. Now, many people often ask me, and particularly when I go to paranormal events, people always want to ask me if Bigfoot is somehow associated with UFOs or somehow interdimensional. I think in some cases there are indications that is a possibility, but not a lot. It's kind of a small minority of cases where you actually have Bigfoot being seen in conjunction with a UFO, or in a location where there was a UFO, or vanishing into thin air. I really do think that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood hominid, something that has avoided being discovered and is living in remote areas. But there are some really weird cases out there that have been written about by Nick and my colleague Stan Gordon and David Weatherly and others, that would indicate that there are some of these creatures seem to be, something let's not say extraterrestrial, let's say ultra-terrestrial.
I like that.
There's some type of intelligence that's beyond our comprehension that is causing them to appear in our reality.
Mm-hmm. Do you follow, what is the first thing that you do when you set out to research or find a creature? I mean, do you have a protocol for yourself?
every case is completely different. I mean, it really depends on my objectives. Sometimes I receive good information or find a credible eyewitness who has had an encounter, and if I've interviewed that person at length and I really get a strong feeling, or if it's multiple witnesses, so there's corroborating evidence, then, that might spur an investigation. Sometimes we just get a wild hair and we say, let's go check out this place because there have been many sightings here over the years, and we want to go put our boots on the ground there. So that, it's, again, every case has been completely different, and I tend to approach them differently just depending on how the information is presented and what I want to accomplish or try to accomplish.
Do you research, other people's stories? Like, do people contact you with, like, stories or experiences, and you research?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, all the time. Particularly after I've been on television shows, or sometimes if I'm a guest on Coast to Coast AM, then I'll get a flurry of emails from people around the country who have claimed to have had remarkable encounters, and perhaps they don't really know who else to tell about it. So they want to unburden themselves and talk about these experiences because they've been affected in very profound ways. I've also dealt with people that are a little bit perhaps fanciful, and I think, and not to be one who would question anyone's experiences, because if someone tells me that they've experienced something, I can't necessarily prove, disprove, or disbelieve. But, I do have people that have gotten in touch with me that seem to have rather remarkable things that are far beyond my expertise, So I'm far more comfortable if someone tells me, we've been seeing this black panther run around our property, then that's something that excites me, because I know if I go out there, if there have been enough sightings, that I have a good chance of finding some physical evidence, like tracks or droppings or something along those lines. If someone tells me they have a vortex on their property and that there are these creatures that are traveling back and forth, that's not really what cryptozoologists do per se, and I don't know.
It's more my kind of realm.
I don't know if there's, yeah, exactly, and I don't know how I would go about trying to collect evidence to prove or disprove that was actually happening, So,
right.
And again, not to say that it couldn't happen, because I think anything is possible. But my passion and interest lies in trying to prove or disprove things definitively as possible through the scientific process with hard empirical evidence.
Perfect. Now, you've mentioned the Black Panther several times. What is mysterious about the Black Panther? Because the Black Panther is kind of like my power animal, I'll say, or my protector. Like in my dream state. So, and I know that that's not related to cryptozoology, but what is the mystery or the fascination with the Black Panther?
Okay. Glad you asked. Okay. As far as big cats go, the only melanistic or black cats that are known are the black leopards that are indigenous to Asia and Africa, and in some cases black or melanistic jaguars that are known in South America. So all of the big cats that are native to North America, primarily mountain lions, also known as cougars or pumas, Felis concolor, are always a tawny, tan, or brown color. There's never been any documented case of a black or melanistic mountain lion. In Europe, there aren't supposed to be any big cats, but there have been hundreds and hundreds of sightings and reports of black panthers running around North America and also in Europe, specifically England and in Western England. Yes, and in England they have many names, the Beast of Bodenmoor, the Beast of Exmoor, and so forth. In North America they're just referred to as black panthers, but it's a real mystery because there's nothing that's native to North America that should look like that. So, the prevalent theories out there is that A, there is a version of black or melanistic mountain lion that's just never been proven, or B, these animals could be escaped pets. So there are people, believe it or not, that will raise things like black leopards or black jaguars So perhaps they've escaped from a zoo or a collection or been set free and that they're living in the wild. But there's such a huge number of reports and sightings that there's definitely something going on.
Wow. Well, I of course find it fascinating because since I was a little girl, I would dream of black panthers. And my father, for my birthdays, several of my birthdays, bought me like what I assumed was a statue or, you know, like a black panther. It would either be a stuffed one or I had 3 like little statues or ornaments or whatever. And my dad told me they were black panthers. So I never knew that black panthers were not supposed to be.
Well, they're supposed they're supposed to be in some places, but not where we are.
Wow.
So they're very mysterious.
Well, I like hearing that because then it makes my experience a little more special for myself. Yeah.
Absolutely. That is a cool animal to be associated with.
So you are going to continue researching this because I would really love to know more.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. That
Nice.
is something that
Nice.
any opportunity I have to investigate that, I would definitely be all on board.
Perfect. So we're coming to the close of the show. So where can people find you? What's coming up for you? Where can we get your book?
Well, thanks again for having me on. First of all, I had a great time. Definitely flew by, and but I had a lot of fun, and hopefully we can do it again.
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as what's coming up, I think I already covered that. I do have some events coming up later this year, but I will be at the Tyler Para Conference in Tyler, Texas next weekend. That's Saturday the 26th, and so if I have any friends out there that live in the Dallas metro area or near Tyler, that's going to be a lot of fun. People can get in touch with me via Facebook I have a Ken Gerhard cryptozoologist fan page. I also just recently launched my website, kengerhard.com. People can get on there as well.
Which looks fabulous, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
And my books are available on Amazon and typically any online book retailer. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, people can also run down to Barnes & Noble if they want to pick up a copy of Encounters with Flying Humanoids.
And you have another book out, correct? About the Birdman, right?
Well, no, I have 2 other books. I have Monsters of Texas, which I actually co-authored with Nick Redfern, who we talked about a moment ago. And that is kind of a variety of different mystery creatures that Nick and I have investigated here in Texas, including Texas Bigfoot, lake monsters, black panthers, thunderbirds, and things like that. And my first book was called Big Bird: Modern Sightings of Flying Monsters. And
that's what I was thinking of.
that's kind of about the so-called thunderbird phenomenon, and flying cryptids that are not human-like but are more like giant birds or giant pterodactyl type animals.
Mm-hmm. Great. Ken, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad that your flight from the West Coast was safe and sound and you were able to make the show.
Well, thanks again for having me, Kimberly. And thank Eric for me for doing a wonderful job on the production, and hopefully we'll do it again real soon.
Okay, thanks, Ken.
Alrighty, take care. Bye.
Thank you guys for joining me and Ken Gerhard on The Mystic Views. I'll see you next week. Day. You may know Ken from, his feature appearances on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, I think A&E, Destination America, True TV. He's everywhere. And there's a good reason for that, because he's good at what he does. And he has the presence to present it. His newest book is Encounters with Flying Humanoids. So, hi, Ken. Welcome, the Monster Hunter. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me on, Kimberly. It's awesome to be here.
It is a real pleasure to have you on. I wanted you on my other show before, but we could never connect, and so I'm really happy today that we connected.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we were able to hook this up, and I appreciate you working with me. My schedule's been a little crazy over the past month or so.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, crazy in a good way, but glad we were able to make it happen.
So how's your book going? Are you doing a lot of book signings and that kind of thing?
I am. I just got back from doing a lecture in Los Angeles last night, and my first West Coast lecture out there. And, I've been doing a lot of interviews. And
never heard of myself, which is the Owlman. So I would like to know a little bit about that, because I've never heard of the Owlman. I mean, everyone's heard of the Mothman and gargoyles, which I'm fascinated with. But the Owlman, I don't know this story or this legend.
Well, Owlman is awesome. He's probably one of my favorite mysterious creatures. Very, very creepy and weird, and sort of England's version of Mothman in some ways, but definitely a handful of sightings of the Owlman that date back to 1976. Starting in Easter of 1976, two young girls were playing out in the woods next to an old creepy church known as Mount Ann Church in Cornwall, England, right there on the coast. And they were on holiday, and they were playing, and they saw what they described as a gray birdman hovering above the church, and they ran screaming back to their parents in hysterics. And that kind of started it off. And then later a couple months later in July, there were two other young ladies that were camping, ages 11 and 14, that were camping out there in the woods. And they saw the Owlman, and the descriptions were, again, very similar. And there's a lot of work that goes into getting the word out on a book. But I've been real happy so far. I've been getting some great feedback, and things are going well, I think.
Good. I still have to get the book. I just now got David Weatherly's new book, and he's a friend. Mm-hmm. But I haven't even read it yet, but I got it. So give me time. I'll get yours too.
Oh, no worries. It's out and available online in gobs of places. And the cool thing is that you can actually run down to your Barnes & Noble and find it there in the metaphysical section. So,
nice. Well,
pretty accessible at every Barnes & Noble location.
Nice. Well, I'm going tomorrow. So I'm actually driving down to Orlando to meet Jim Mallard. You know who that is. Everybody knows Jim. Yeah, yep. He's down here in Florida, so we're going to meet up and see what trouble we can get into together. So
sounds like a good time.
Yeah, I'll have to stop by and get your book while I'm in shopping town. I don't shop very much or go to town. So in your book, I was looking over some of the things that it contained, and the Mothman, and one that I have, Kimberly Rackley, and this is the Mystic View Show. Before we get started, I would like to send out a lot of love and prayers to the director of Nightside Paranormal. His mother passed away unexpectedly last night, and it was kind of a shock for his family. And I just want him to know that we all love him and adore him, and our prayers are with him. And it was kind of sad because today's a good day for me with Nightside Paranormal. It's my birthday with Nightside Paranormal. 2 years being lead psychic medium and assistant director, and we call it Blight Day. So today is my Blight Day with Nightside Paranormal. So I celebrated by buying myself new earrings, like most ladies do. But all right. So Brian, we love you. We're with you. We're thinking about you. And if you need us, you know where to find us. Tonight, my guest is Ken Gerhard. He's a cryptozoologist, author, researcher, speaker. He's just about everything you can imagine. He's called the Monster Hunter, which my son kind of likes. He can't wait to maybe meet Ken in person one day. cosmic people. I'm Dr. Kimberly